corporate press, I've had my fill. I'm just a simple chap, believing in my own will. Rap, fire, math, table, scheming, this is no drill. Haters masking boosted, but still with no chill. Need to come and take it if you wanna mess with my hill. We've been 3D printing, set ready for that ghost kill.
Hello, Canada, and welcome to another episode of The Maple Pill. As always, I'm your host, Matt McKeever. And before we jump into tonight's stories, I saw a bunch of people lighting up the YouTube comments, so just want to say shout out. Appreciate when you guys engage with these videos. So Sak Kohana was in the chat right off the bat, just sharing some of their hot takes in regards to what's going on in the crazy world, as well as crazy Canada. So appreciate you jumping in there. Also see we've got Kyle O'Connor. Kyle wants me to say epidemiological. Just FYI, guys, pronouncing words is definitely not my strong suit. We've also got Terry in the chat. Again, just appreciate you guys jumping in there and see what's the most recent chat. I guess you just have to roll with it and hold your own with like-minded individuals. It's why the government is so hard to crack. Oh, got covered up there. They have done just that. Yeah, I definitely agree with that, Terry. And again, appreciate everyone jumping in there. I see we've got HE, we've got Benjamin, we've got Stepfar, P58, Graham. Wow, yeah, everyone's lining up the chat. Appreciate that, guys. But anyways, we've got a full episode of the Maple Pill to cover tonight, so we're going to jump into it. We're going to be talking about inflation again. We're also going to be talking about what's going on with Tamara Lich and Marco Mendicino and a lot more. Yeah, as usual, there's a lot of red and black pills tonight, but I think we've got some interesting white pills as well. So let's jump into it. The first story we're going to be covering is from the Western Standard. Bank of Canada says to expect prolonged inflation, more interest rate hikes. So a lot of this is to be expected at this point in time, but I did think it was worth highlighting a couple points here from the Western Standard article. Again, reminder, links to all of the articles in the video description down below. When asked by Conservative MP Ed Fast if inflation was still believed to be transitory in nature, Macklem responded, "It's fair to say that Team Transitory has disbanded." Interesting way to even choose to frame that. All these factors mean that inflation is not only higher, but it will take longer to come down, and Canadians will, unfortunately, have to live with high inflation. So yeah, just an FYI there, guys. Inflation's here to stay in case you already didn't get the memo. Next, jumping over to CTV News, Conservatives open statistically significant lead over Liberals, according to Nano's poll. Again, I don't want to jump to any conclusions with polls. I think, unfortunately, in these, very partisan era politics that we find ourselves in, there's a lot of different incentives out there, and it can be easy, I think, to lead the witness in regards to this. But just to highlight here, the Conservative Party of Canada has opened up a statistically significant lead over the governing Liberals, the latest poll from Nanos research shows. As of April 22nd, support for the Conservatives increased 4.3% points over 4 weeks to 35.6%, overtaking the Liberals, whose support dropped 2.2% points to 30%. At the bottom of the CTV News here, they've got kind of a nice little summary breaking down. We can see, PPC and Bloc overall seem to be holding their own down a little. Green's up a hair, and then NDP and Liberals are down, and it appears right now that Conservatives are the ones primarily picking it up. I guess one interesting thing to note is right now the Conservatives obviously are in their leadership race, so it's interesting to see them, gaining traction during the leadership race. Is this just the result of all the different candidates out there, doing their stump speeches and all that stuff? I suspect it is. So again, if we were to call a snap election, I don't know if you could, I know I wouldn't want to bet that this is exactly how it would break out because, yeah, it always is a dynamic situation when we're talking about elections. Next from CBC News, Confederate flag at Hamilton area home prompts calls for changes to hate symbol laws. Now, you guys know I'm not a big fan of hate crimes. I really think that most crimes can just fall under crimes, and we don't necessarily need to get into the underlying motivations behind it. Right now, understand that, and CBC's article lays this out as well, but right now, the way, hate crime or hate laws are written in Canada, essentially you're allowed to fly something like the Confederate flag on your personal property. However, if it's decided that the reason you were motivated to do that was to intimidate or be hateful towards someone else, then you could actually be charged. So I feel like I shouldn't even have to break this down, but this is where all of a sudden we get into things like, what were your intentions? And we've heard people say that they're intimidated these days by the Canadian flag because of the Freedom Convoy protesters and when they were in downtown Ottawa protesting. So, well, right now, this is only taking aim at the Confederate flag. Understand that, we've seen how quickly these things evolve. And so, again, I don't think this is a good idea to try and, one, read people's minds in regards to their underlying motivations. And two, I'm still a big believer in that idea of sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And so I don't think we should have things like hate speech. Straight up, again, you can say, hurtful, evil things, and that makes you a douchebag. And certainly I've got no issues with, society wanting to ostracize on an individual level in regards to you. I just don't think that we literally as a collective should be teaming up in this regards and, changing these laws. But I'd love to hear your thoughts, your opinions. What's your hot take? And does it matter what the symbol is? Or is it just any symbol that someone could find hateful or hurtful? Would you be okay with that being banned? Next, jumping over to global news, Canadian MPs unanimously vote to recognize Russian genocide in Ukraine. Now, at first when I read this, I was like, this, again, maybe there's the greatest of intentions behind this, but this feels like it's only escalating things in regards to Ukraine and Russia, because, usually when we're dealing with someone that causes genocide, there's really no forgiveness in regards to genocide, right? And so it feels like you're really cornering Russia, and more particularly Vladimir Putin and his, direct cronies into a corner where they've got nothing to lose if they think that they're going to be on the other end of a crimes against humanity trial. However, it's a little bit more nuanced in regards to what the MPs actually voted on. So the Canadian House of Commons on Wednesday unanimously voted to recognize Russian President Vladimir Putin's butchery and brutality during the invasion of Ukraine as genocide. NDP MP Heather McPherson put forward a motion seeking support for that proposal following question period, and MPs from all parties voted in favor of it. The motion is not binding and does not carry direct consequences under broader international law, where the definition is laid out by the United Nations and its International Criminal Court. So right now, this is primarily symbolism, but it certainly feels like symbolism and rhetoric that, I don't know. It just feels like we're not going to be able to step back from this. It feels like the Warhawks will absolutely get their day in the sun in regards to Russia. And speaking of Russia, this is from the Globe and Mail. Russia cuts off gas to Poland, Bulgaria, and escalation of war on Ukraine. Now, this is something that, to the best of my knowledge, they've been kind of telling us about for an extended period of time. What's everyone's thoughts on Russia these days in the Ukraine conflict? I wish that there was just an undo button where we could just undo all this craziness. Unfortunately, I don't think that's the case. And I don't know. It seems like this is going to drag on for an extended period of time. Hopefully, I'm proven wrong on that. Next from True North, Canadian Forces veteran James Top makes it to Manitoba. So just want to highlight this quick because I hadn't been sharing his progress. We originally just touched in. I forget when he originally took off, but we covered it, the first day he rolled out from, I believe it was BC. And just wanted to give you guys an update that he's now in Manitoba. So I didn't actually look in regards to, what percentage of his trip that is, but I suspect that, he's getting halfway there or more because that's a hell of a haul walking from BC to Manitoba. Next, from Blacklock's reporter, and this is going to bring us into our first red pill story of the day. Now I face termination, not anti-vax pro-choice. Fed suspend 2,560 workers. Federal manager suspended without pay more than 2,500 employees for declining to show proof of vaccination records. Employees stripped of salary and benefits include 66 at the Department of Health and Public Health Agency that spoke against coercive vaccinations. It's fascinating. We're going to be covering it in a story later on today, but it really does feel like a lot of other countries are backing off in regards to the COVID narrative and deciding that either, now that people are vaccinated, that's less of a risk overall to our society, or, hey, even if it's the exact same risk or a greater risk than when we started this pandemic, what are you going to do about it? Are we literally going to live in a bubble for the rest of our lives? And it seems like Canada is focused on, taking the Chinese route and trying to live in a bubble. Next from the Globe and Mail, Ottawa plans to forgive up to 50% of COVID-19 pandemic loans to Indigenous businesses. I don't like it when the government plays favorites. We've discussed in the past in regards to First Nation reserves and the complexities that are when you've got like a two-state solution, right? And in Canada, with the First Nations reserves, they've got some autonomy, but not a lot of autonomy. And there's interesting unintended consequences from those sort of policy choices. However, I don't think the government should be playing favorites in this regards to Indigenous businesses. I think that they should essentially get the same treatment as anyone else would have under the previous loans, right? The reason they came out with a whole separate program is because literally, again, the way the government interacts with Indigenous businesses is going to be different than just normal businesses, again, because of that quasi two-state solution we've got. The federal government says it will forgive up to half of the value of loans given to Indigenous entrepreneurs through a pandemic emergency fund. The Indigenous Business Initiative was launched in the spring of 2020 to provide emergency interest-free loans up to $60,000 to Indigenous-owned businesses. The program was modeled after the Canada Emergency Business Account, CEBA, the government's main emergency loan fund. The 2022 federal budget, tabled earlier this month, announced that the non-repayable portion would soon increase to 50% of the value of the loan. And so one thing I did want to highlight here, because I realize not everyone's going to be familiar with how Indigenous entrepreneurs operate, right? And some of the impacts based upon the policies around how First Nations reserves operate. But he said Indigenous entrepreneurs face systemic barriers such as not being able to own land for those operating on reserve, which makes it more difficult to post collateral for traditional bank loans. And yeah, I agree with that. It definitely, there are advantages and disadvantages to Indigenous businesses. And I wouldn't be shocked to learn that the disadvantages outweigh the advantages. Again, I haven't dug personally deep into it, but I don't think the government should just be shooting from the hip in regards to these policies. It'd make a lot more sense to really take a overall, high level approach to this and figure out long term how to fix this rather than just cutting these like one-offs. I don't think that this is going to make or break a lot of businesses per se. And again, this doesn't solve the overall or underlying problem there. It just feels like, government just, what's the matter? We've already given away the money, right? And this is something we've talked about in the past in regards to, loans to Ukraine. We've loaned out hundreds of millions of dollars to Ukraine. But again, sometimes those loans can turn into grants or subsidies or essentially like a gift. And no, it should be very clear from day one, the structure of any government spending, right? And any government loans that are going out. We shouldn't just have these ad hoc changes. Not a fan of it. Next, from Canada News Media, access to info system at Library and Archives Canada and Bleak State Watchdog. I'm curious, have you guys ever made a freedom of request of information? I think I screwed up the order of those words, but essentially, have you ever asked the government for documents? I've never personally done it. I've got a handful of friends that have. It really does sound like one, it's actually surprisingly expensive oftentimes if there's a lot of data involved. And two, it sounds like it's a very slow process. And it turns out those anecdotal stories I'd heard from friends are more than just anecdotal. Ottawa, a new report says Liberal Archives Canada is frequently failing to answer formal requests for historical records in a timely way. The special report by Information Commissioner Caroline Maynard, tabled in Parliament today, says almost 80% of the requests handled by the National Archives did not meet timeframes set out in the Access to Information Act. Hey, they're hitting it 20% of the time. That's actually pretty good for a government agency, I think. If Trudeau spoke the truth 20% of the time, I think that would be an improvement. Next from the Mises Institute, 1991, when America tried to keep Ukraine in the USSR. And again, this is just a snapshot of one piece of the story of Ukraine and Russia. As we've mentioned, it really does come down to where you decide to start history and tracking in regards to likely who you're going to consider the good guy or bad guy in most geopolitical situations. The U.S. government today likes to pretend that it is the perennial champion of political independence for countries that were once behind the Iron Curtain. was often forgotten, however, is that in the days following the fall of the Berlin Wall, Washington opposed independence for Soviet republics like Ukraine and the Baltic states. In fact, the Bush administration openly, this would be Bush Sr., in fact, the Bush administration openly supported Mikhail Gorbachev's efforts to hold the Soviet Union together rather than allow the USSR to decentralize into smaller states. The US regime and its supporters in the press took the position that nationalism, not Soviet despotism, was the real problem for the people of Eastern Europe and the Caucasus. Indeed, in the case of Ukraine, President George H.W. Bush even traveled to Kiev in 1990 to lecture the Ukrainians about the dangers of seeking independence from Moscow while decrying the supposed nationalist threat. And so if you guys just want to go down a rabbit hole of research on that history lesson, again, link in the video description down below. Next from Rebel News, liberals claim no media blacklist. We've covered this in the past, and what really drove this, I guess, is twofold, right? We've seen Justin Trudeau demonize Rebel News and essentially refuse to call them a media news outlet. Then we also had the Bank of Canada talking about essentially their blacklist, or the fact that they didn't like interacting with reporters like Blacklock's reporter. And Blacklock's is, one of the resources we regularly turn to. I think they've got some of the most hard-hitting coverage of Canadian news in Canada. A lot of our red and black pill stories, the ones that I think really have merit, that have a lot of heft to them, often come from Blacklock's reporter. And so it's interesting to hear the government constantly doing and acting one way and saying something else that contradicts it. The statement from federal ministries denying blacklists are in stark contrast to the treatment of independent outlets by Justin Trudeau, who refused to take questions from Rebel News at last year's leaders debate. And I think the really concerning thing about this is, we see right now Justin Trudeau essentially and his administration implementing, new classifications and kind of new certifications for acceptable Canadian news media outlets. And we've already heard how Rebel News won't be on that list, right? That they're considered by the government to not be a legitimate news media outlet. And I think that we're going to see a lot of independent journalists continue to be demonized, continue to be blacklisted, continue to be pushed out of being able to report on the government because they don't give the same favorable coverage. Now, why don't they give the same favorable coverage? Maybe they're just, partisan hacks. Or maybe it's the fact that they don't receive any funding from the Canadian government, unlike all the other mainstream media news outlets that we've covered in the past, right? Hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars to the CBC over the course of the pandemic so far. If you don't think that that's going to bias a news media outlet, well, then maybe the idea that the prime minister might just decide that you're no longer a valid news media outlet if you disagree with him. Well, maybe that would scare you into falling in line with Justin Trudeau and, the Liberal Party's narrative that they want to see in the mainstream press. If you guys want further details on this, link in the video description down below. But yeah, I don't know. I believe Canada's government absolutely has a blacklist. They've got a shit list, whatever you want to frame it as. And I suspect in the future, they're just going to use manipulation of language in order to continue to deny these things, right? They're going to say, we don't have a blacklist, we just have an approved list. And it turns out that no independent news media outlets that don't receive funding from the government aren't on that list. What are the odds? It's just a crazy coincidence. Next from Blacklock's reporter, and this is going to switch us into our first black pill story of the day. Government relied on CBC stories. So Cabinet relied on CBC stories for justification in using emergency powers against the Freedom Convoy. Attorney General David Lametti testified last night at parliamentary hearings. Lametti said he invoked the Emergencies Act after CBC News falsely reported foreigners bankrolled the protest. There were reports, testified Lametti. CBC reported, I believe, on the 14th of February or the 13th of February that there was foreign funding through a variety of different sites. The various pieces of information that we had explained, the various measures that we took, said Lametti. He did not elaborate. So again, the government-funded news outlets pushed out fake news that then was used to justify the government enacting unprecedented measures against the public. And now we've got an inquiry where Justin Trudeau and his cabinet have essentially said the primary goal of the inquiry is to figure out how we as a society got into this situation, not whether the government was actually justified in their implementation of this. And as we continue to see this roll out, it seems like the government's on flimsier and flimsier ground. Unless, for whatever reason, they're holding back, a treasure trove of private, information that hasn't leaked yet that no one else has seen. It really does seem like they literally relied on CBC News and a handful of other mainstream media news outlets with their fake news coverage, right? We covered in the past Justin Ling, his reporting that there was loaded shotgun seized from the Ottawa convoy protesters, which Ottawa police have denied. They said they haven't pressed any charges. And it honestly was like pulling teeth for a member of parliament to even get that answer. But hey, at least we did eventually get it. And so jumping over, Andrew Lawton's got a clip here of Marco Mendicino literally spreading fake news that we've known for a while. Such fake news that even CBC News at this point in time has reported that the accused arson in Ottawa had nothing to do with the Freedom Trucker convoy protesters. But I mean, it makes for such a good headline that I understand why the Liberals want to continue to push that fake narrative.
When residents can't get to work, when they can't take their children to school, when seniors can't get around because public transportation can't get to them, when people who live in apartment buildings find that their front doors are locked and that fires are set in the hallways and corridors.
Point of order, Speaker.
It is
Un instant, Monsieur le Ministre. Oui, Monsieur Mott.
That statement right there has been proven false by the Ottawa Police Service, and there is no connection to the protesters whatsoever. And for this minister to suggest that is absolutely unacceptable of this committee.
Yeah. If you're going to be justifying the Emergencies Act, you should actually have your facts straight, right? And honestly, there's no excuse for Mendicino not being aware of this. So either it's just sheer incompetence, or they were hoping just to squeak that lie through, get it in the public record again, and hope that, the truth just gets memory hold. It's jarring to see our government create these straw man arguments based upon lies and falsehoods that are from the exact media organizations that our government funds. If this was in Eastern Europe, if this was in South America or Africa or Asia, literally, if it was pretty much anywhere but in Canada, our government would denounce it as fake news, as partisanship, right, and as just politicking. But when it's in Canada, it's just an honest mistake, bud. Don't even worry about it. Next from Blacklock's reporter, false convoy claim repeated. So again, they're just covering Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino last night repeated false claims Freedom Convoy protesters attempted to burn down an Ottawa apartment building. Mendicino made the remarks in committee testimony as MPs and senators puzzled over why cabinet declared a national emergency to end the protest. And honestly, you know what? If I take a step back, I can barely even blame members of cabinet, the Liberal cabinet members, because honestly, they're so used to mainstream media never asking any hard questions, never actually trying to get to the bottom of a story. They're always just looking for give me my byline, right? Like give me the quick little quip, give me a little quote. We'll put out a puff piece and we'll move on to the next piece of the news cycle. Oh, do you want me to call the truckers racist, misogynist, and Nazis again? Next from Spencer Fernando, Trudeau's use of Emergencies Act keeps looking worse and worse. Each new explanation for invoking authoritarian powers is weaker than the last one. I'm a big fan of Spencer's blog posts, his articles he's regularly posting on his website. This one's no exception. The blockade at the Ambassador Bridge was cleared using existing government authority, and events in Ottawa never turned violent. And those are two really important measures, right? And we recently saw, we haven't covered it on any of our Maple Pill episodes, but you guys can do a quick Google. I think it was MSN News originally that was headed on their webpage. But, a new study shows that the economic impact of the blockades at the border turned out not to be nearly as severe as mainstream media and Liberal politicians led us to believe. Surprise, surprise, right? It can't be emphasized enough that Marco Mendicino is flat out lying here. He is attempting to claim the Freedom Convoy participants were involved in setting fires, despite the police having made clear that wasn't the case. Even CBC had to admit this. And so he's actually got the quote here from CBC, right? So if you guys want to go on a deep dive, definitely check out Spencer Fernando's website. Next from CBC News, anti-hate group calls for regulator to police social media platforms. And, the anti-hate group, the Canadian anti-hate group. Where have we heard of that before? Evan Balgord, executive director of the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, said an omnibus person could put more pressure on tech companies to do more to reduce online harms. Now, you might be thinking, Evan Balgord, sorry. Where have we heard that name before? Have we talked about him before, Matt? Yes, we have, because he was one of CBC News' experts that was pushing fake news. And we'll jump over to the post-millennial just to remind you guys about this. CBC experts warn against far-right connotations of the word freedom. But the most jarring aspect of this was actually when Jonathan Kay, a writer at Quillette, actually called him out because what's his name was sharing fake news here. He was literally taking screenshots from a Miami anti-Jewish protester and pretending that it was being shared from Ottawa. Later afterwards, when he was called on this, he said that it was a friend of his that had shared it, yada, yada, yada. But again, the damage is done when CBC News originally put out that article, right? Their retractions, their corrections don't get the same coverage, and mainstream media has already moved on in the 24-hour news cycle. There are serious consequences to this. And again, think about this. A nonprofit organization funded by the Canadian government is an expert used by the Canadian media to demonize real grassroots Canadian protesters in order to enact unprecedented Emergencies Act against Canadian citizens, freezing, locking them out of their bank accounts, so on and so forth. Yeah, this is literally what you'd expect a tin pot dictatorship to do, not something that we'd expect in Canada, or at least not the Canada I grew up in. And so again, here's just a link to Jonathan Kay's tweet if you guys want to check it out further. And now jumping over to the counter signal, AstraZeneca president can't answer why the company needed indemnity. And yeah, let's just listen in.
This question, both witnesses, we'll start with Ms. Coombs. A previous witness has told us that the global distribution of vaccine is subject to indemnification clauses that countries have to sign on to, meaning that if something goes wrong, your companies are shielded from liability. People cannot sue if they experience or perceive they have experienced vaccine injuries. Instead, any compensation would be paid out by a no-fault mechanism funded by COVAX, to which industry does not contribute. This witness further told us that you had asked for this protection as part of your agreements. So could you please explain why your company asked for indemnification clauses, why public bodies should assume those liabilities, and whether these indemnification clauses would apply in cases where information had been withheld by your company with respect to risks?
So I'm not privileged as to specifically the indemnification clause in the contract that you speak of. What I can say is that AstraZeneca stands behind our medicines and the safety profile of our medicines. And so,
ma'am, sorry to jump in, but you're the Canadian president of the company here, and you're telling me you're not aware of the details of the indemnification clauses. We're told that you asked for them. So why did you ask for them?
I asked for the indemnification clause on the Vaxzevria contract with Canada. So I'm clear.
We were told by a previous witness who's affiliated with Gavi that industry representatives asked for indemnification clauses as part of contracts for the global distribution of vaccines. Why?
I think that indemnification clauses in all of my time in the pharmaceutical industry is standard part of contracting. The specific details in which you talk about, I just am not I don't have the knowledge to answer
enough at all, but I wonder if Mr. Paquette can come in.
Yeah, again, why should they ever be held accountable, right? Like, we never get held accountable. Why would you hold us accountable this time? Next from Fee Stories, why James Madison would be appalled at Fauci's contempt for checks and balances. And it honestly, it blows my mind sometimes how these, lifelong public servants, and the reason we call them public servants is there was back in the day, I swear to God, there was a time in history when they actually served the public rather than made sure the public served them. Dr. Fauci last week expressed dismay that a federal law saw fit to block the Center for Diseases Control's transport mask mandate. Speaking to CNN's Cassie Hunt, Fauci made it clear he didn't just disagree with the legal reasoning of Judge Catherine Kimball Mizell, whose opinion he described as unsound, but was upset that the judicial branch more broadly had the authority to block CDC public health edicts. Those types of things really are the purview of the CDC. This is a public health issue, Fauci said. We are concerned about that, about courts getting involved in things that are unequivocally public health decisions. I mean, this is a CDC issue. It should not be a court issue. So he honestly doesn't see why there should be a check against his powers, right? Why would we have checks and balances? I'm essentially your new God figure, Lord Fauci, and you should just do as I demand rather than dare, ask or question any of my authority. Him and Cartman actually feel like they get along really well together as long as they're on the right side of an issue. Post-millennial, and this brings us into our clown pill story of the day. Breaking: Amazon pulls ads for Matt Walsh's children's book, claiming it is political commentary. And this is just fascinating when we've got all these, when we literally see so much indoctrination being pushed out on young children right now, that Matt Walsh's book, Johnny the Walrus, which is about a kid that wants to identify as a walrus, and it turns out that's not actually good for the kid, right? You shouldn't actually just let your kid pretend to be a walrus indefinitely for the rest of his life. There's going to be severe consequences to that. Integrating into society is going to be an issue. Now, I haven't read the child's book yet. I don't think it was available in Canada, so I think I've pre-ordered it. And I'm going to have to double check to make sure Amazon didn't accidentally delete my pre-order. But Amazon said Walsh's book, which challenges the narrative of transgender activism, was not appropriate, pulled it from the category of children's books and labeled it political commentary. And the only reason he's doing that, or the only reason Amazon's doing this, is because they say it goes against the trans agenda. Again, if it's literally written appropriately for children, it shouldn't matter, right? Like this idea that just talking about like, hey, a kid actually can't be a walrus and parents shouldn't indulge these fantasies seems actually like pretty sound book to me, right? It's bizarre. Again, I haven't read the book yet. I look forward to getting it. And those of you that are, homeschooling or looking to unschool your children, Matt Walsh is maybe someone you're going to want to look into. At this point in time, pretty much whenever, the powers that be want to demonize someone, I naturally think, hey, this is something I need to look a little bit further into. This is probably something I'm going to like. But this is a surprise for me as much as it is for you guys. Our first white pill story of the day actually involves Dr. Fauci. Dr. Anthony Fauci says U.S. out of pandemic phase of COVID-19. Now, again, as always, he's very slippery with his language in regards to saying we're out of the pandemic. But if nothing else, this is a slight step in the right direction. Dr. Anthony Fauci announced this week that the United States is likely out of the pandemic phase of COVID-19. The senior health official was speaking with PBC News when he made the declaration after 2 years of lockdowns, regulations, and a worldwide vaccination effort. We are certainly right now in this country out of the pandemic phase, said Fauci. Again, we are certainly right now in this country out of the pandemic phase. Feels like at any moment he could retract that or state that new information has came up. But hey, at least for now, U.S. is out of the pandemic. I wonder if that means that their northern neighbors, Canada, is maybe close to being out of the pandemic as well. I'm sure that if we simply depend upon our existing experts, that will not be the case. But a man can hope, right? The counter signal, 4 things that changed within 48 hours of Elon Musk buying Twitter. For those of you that are, deep on Twitter all the time, I'm sure you already know what we're talking about. But if not, something magical seems to be happening on Twitter right now. The biggest part I just wanted to highlight, again, lots of different right-leaning, freedom-oriented influencers have stated this. Literally over the last maybe it's more than 48 hours now, but like over the last 48, 72 hours since Elon Musk, it looked pretty certain that he's going to acquire Twitter. It seems like, magically right-oriented influencers now are seeing massive increases in the number of subscribers, and left-leaning or progressives are seeing massive drop-offs in subscribers. Now, there could be a handful of different explanations for this, but if you were to ask me to share a conspiracy on it, the conspiracy I'd share is they probably had a lot of shenanigans in regards to the algorithms. And I think that there was a lot of active efforts to try and diminish or decrease the influence the right had and actively push up or prop up what the left gets for exposure and influence. And I imagine that they're scared that if Elon Musk was to come in, that being a sharp guy, he would easily be able to identify it, or someone on his team more likely would be able to identify it. And all of a sudden, worst case scenario for Twitter, it would actually turn out that they've lied to Congress in the past in regards to shadow banning and things of that nature. And under probably best case scenarios is they'd have egg on their face and definitely look embarrassed and potentially, even be in breach of some of the details. I don't know the details, but some of the potential details of the acquisition deal from Elon. So if nothing else, hey, maybe you want to check out Twitter. It seems like it's becoming a little bit more balanced than it was before. Next, convoy organizer Tamara Lich, and this is from the National Post, to receive George Jonas Freedom Award to be presented June 16th by the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. And this is good. I think that, I think that the movement we experienced here in Canada back in February and March was bigger than any one individual. But certainly Tamara Lich seems to have played a major role in it. And I think she deserves credit for it because, again, you did literally have everyone in mainstream media demonizing you. You had the prime minister and his cabinet and MPs spreading lies and fake news and all sorts of accusations against her and members of the Freedom Trucker Convoy. So I think it's great to see the JCCF giving her this award. And then finally, last white pill story of the day from Bitcoin Magazine. Official, the Central African Republic has adopted Bitcoin as legal tender. And this is great to see. And I hope that this is still just the tip of the iceberg. It seems like almost once a week now, we have an article or a story about a country that's on the cusp of adopting Bitcoin as legal tender or that is actively doing it. And I can only think that, game theory should dictate that as we see a few more countries join in on this, that all of a sudden we're going to start to see a real bum rush towards Bitcoin being adopted as a legal tender. Meanwhile, reminder, we covered it yesterday in one of our stories, but the Bank of Canada says that Bitcoin is no big deal and you should really just, focus on the Canadian dollar as your store of wealth. And, Bitcoin's definitely not an inflation hedge and not an alternative currency to the Canadian dollar. And to that, all I've got to say to the Bank of Canada is have fun staying poor. You're not going to be able to print yourself out of the hole that you've dug up until this point in time. And so that's it for White Pill Stories. Jumping over to the meme of the day. This is from Rothmus. But I was told inflation would be transitory. Yeah. As we started the episode of the Maple Pill Off, we all now have official confirmation from the Bank of Canada that that's not going to be the case. So yeah, that's it for tonight's Maple Pill. I've got to get going shortly because I've got another meeting. But if you guys enjoyed this episode, smash the like button, hit subscribe if you're new to the channel. Again, we hit 1,000 subs on YouTube, so that was kind of a mental milestone for myself, so I really do appreciate that. Reminder, I am uploading these videos to Rumble and BitChute after the live streams, and yes, I need to kick myself in the ass and start live streaming on Rumble as well. I just need to figure out the logistics, and sometimes the tech's a real son of a bitch. So I'll try and carve out some time this weekend so that we can start live streaming on Rumble, because I really do want to build up my presence on these alternative media outlets. If you guys want more Matt McKeever in your life, check me out on Instagram, Matt McKeever Unfiltered, mainly just sharing memes and shit posting and things of that nature. And yeah, otherwise, I appreciate you guys making this a two-way conversation. It really is nice to have you guys in the chat so active. Last couple of days have definitely been popular. I see a lot of things going on. So I'm just going to kind of scroll here quick, look for something. Chat is on screen. Chat is on screen. Chat is on screen. I'm not sure what that was about, Terry, but Kohano, who made those MPs think their opinion is important in Ukraine? Like who fooled them? Yeah, I don't know about it, but I think the biggest thing is just understanding that these virtue signaling things, right? Like saying that condemning Russia for genocide. I don't think that, you're not just going to be able to undo that without losing face. And so I don't think that the Canadian government will ever want to undo that. And so I think that that really alienates Russia further. Now, again, you may be of the let's destroy Russia, let's destroy Putin narrative, but just understand that this is probably going to draw this out a lot longer if Russia believes that they're a social pariah no matter what, right? If they're essentially going to be treated like North Korea, why not act like North Korea? And again, as we've seen, no one benefits from that, right? North Korea doesn't benefit it. Certainly their citizens don't benefit. And the world just gets a more, it seems like it just creates a more deranged leader, right? But that's just my personal hot take. Geopolitics is always very complicated. Kohana, Russia should cut off gas in Germany and France as well. LOL. And they've been threatening to, and it really comes down to if they're going to settle, right? In rubles, I believe Germany has stated that they want to slowly ease off the Russian gas. Smart Hungarian. I popped into the stream and removed the chat comment. Okay, I'm not sure what... maybe there was someone spamming. Appreciate that, Peter. Kyle O'Connor, suspending these workers without pay over vaccine passport and taking away their benefits and pensions is a crime against humanity. This is not the society I want to belong to. And I can't imagine a lot of us do, where we literally have medical tyranny and medical apartheid based upon one's individual medical decisions. Kohana, I'm so sick of companies forcing people to do a medical procedure in order to put food on the table. Absolutely disgusting. I agree. And again, it's a strong argument for all of us to get your financial fortress of solitude in place, right? Start becoming more financially independent, build, multiple revenue or income streams, start building parallel institutions as well. Because when we're beholden to the existing infrastructure, when we're beholden to the existing regime and their institutions, it honestly is extremely difficult to decouple yourself from those without having an alternative already available. And so I think it's really upon all of us to keep pushing forward, right? Building alternative media, building alternative finance, building alternative businesses and communities, and even whether it's like closed loop economies or local barter and trade agreements with your neighbors. All that stuff will allow you to be in a much better position to decouple from the corruption that is our existing institutions. Kohana, Justin Trudeau is such a narcissist, he can't take negative criticism. If you don't think he's God, you're on his list to have your bank account frozen. And it may not be quite that bad yet, but give it a little time. And I'm sure he'll find new excuses and new reasons to crack down on all of us. Kohana says, I love Matt Walsh. I agree. The Hungarian experiment, I identify as a walrus. I'm offended. Cancel Maple Pill. And again, my understanding is it's actually, it seems at least like a relatively clever take that Matt Walsh has used. And are you literally going to start feeding, do walruses eat raw fish? I think they do. Are you going to start feeding your child just raw fish? Are you going to start are you going to build an aquarium or a giant water tank for them to live in? And while it may seem a little absurd on the surface, I honestly don't think we're that far, right? You guys have probably seen the videos on TikTok of people walking other humans that identify as dogs, right? If not, if you want to waste a bunch of time and become more depressed about the state of humanity, go check out TikTok. And if not, just take my word for it. It's pretty crazy. Graham, Twitter banned me when I shared the letter from the Canadian general about the Canadian troops coming back sick from Wuhan military games. Maybe I'll get my account back. I can't speak to that, Graham, but I certainly know a lot of individuals seem to make it sound like they're getting their accounts back, and or they're able to at least set up a new account with the same phone number, which was previously blacklisted from Twitter. So again, it seems anecdotal so far. To the best of my knowledge, Twitter hasn't announced any policy changes or anything like that, but it really does seem like that's rolling out. Kohana says, the Central African Republic has been riddled with devastating civil wars over the past 30 years. Bitcoin would be great for their economy. Yeah, and I think it's really important to understand in that regards that, Bitcoin is just about individual sovereignty and property rights. And so if individuals are able to, participate outside of a corrupt system, it can really create a higher trust local network. And as Matt Ridley in his book, The Rational Optimist, breaks down and explains, we thrive as humans in high trust societies, right? That's where we're able to progress and we can benefit from each other's labors through voluntary cooperation and trading and interaction. And I think that Bitcoin is a key puzzle piece in regards to the future and all of us being in a stronger position. In the past, when I had my finance and real estate YouTube channel, I'd regularly talk about fuck you money. And, most people associate fuck you money with just a giant wad of money, right? Like $1 million in the bank account. That's my fuck you money. But as we saw back in February, it only goes so far, because if the bank or the government can freeze that account, well, then it seems more like fuck me money rather than fuck you money. And that seems counterproductive. So I really do think that Bitcoin will continue to see become a more and more powerful institution in regards to finance. And I think a lot of freedom-oriented individuals would do well to at least become more familiar with it. Not saying you need to ape in or go hyper Bitcoinization, but I'm starting to lean that way. And, maybe I probably just need to set a personal goal, but maybe by the end of the year, I'll find myself in a situation where the vast majority of my finances are related to the Bitcoin network rather than, our corrupt fiat banking network. Tara says, I kind of think we are all having to stop talking about creating an alternative society and actually do it. Do you think it's possible to somehow create an actual community of like-minded people and make our own currency? I give someone a week's worth of produce for fixing my car. Just thinking out loud. I do believe so, Tara. And certainly, creating an alternative society, I think, is very doable. That's, one of the baby steps here at the Citadel is moving in that direction, right? Buying this property where multiple individuals can live, where real estate's cheap, where there's a lot of abundance from, natural resources or land, right? Hunting, fishing, things of that nature, as well as cheap agricultural land. So I do think the Citadel is uniquely positioned well for that. And I think that you certainly can create your own currency, but I personally think that, a more stable approach would be to create either like your own closed loop Bitcoin economy or alternatively like peg to Bitcoin, right? So what if you and say like 10 or 20 community members all got together, all ran your own individual Lightning node or your own little like splinter closed economy on Lightning. And I'm not going to be able to explain this well, but definitely in my head, I understand how it works. Essentially, like, let's say there was, again, I think it would just be as easy to denominate things in sats as anything else. And if you had like a truly functioning economy where no one needed to off ramp, you literally would never need to settle on chain, and you guys could all just keep your transactions in this closed loop. Alternatively, if there, say, was an individual whose primary contribution to your network was being the fiat off ramp. So let's say, you're interacting and trading with sats, but every now and then, maybe you got to pay the mortgage, maybe you need to fix your car and there's not a mechanic in your closed economy and you need fiat. Well, if there's at least one individual that would be willing to buy your sats in the closed economy, that can be a way to continue to keep the economy closed and never have to settle on chain. Now, why that would be a net benefit, I'll leave you guys to do your own little research on that. But certainly, I think trying to create these closed loops or these closed economies is a really interesting opportunity right now. And understanding that, for the cost of like a really simple PC or Raspberry Pi, you could be operating, and like a decent sized hard drive, you could be operating your own Lightning node or similar, some other L2 or L3 layer on the Bitcoin network. And again, it's backed by real Bitcoin, right? So it's actually pegged to something. It can't just be inflated the way that the government does with our fiat currencies. And again, there's no reason that you need to be like settling on layer one on Bitcoin if everyone's just happy staying on the side chain, right? Or on layer two or layer three. I'm sure that it's more confusing the way I explained it than it actually is. I should definitely spend a little bit of time. I will spend a little bit of time in the future and try and put together a more comprehensive explanation, because it's something that I want to do up here at the Citadel. And it's something that I think a lot of other individuals that are looking to actually do that will need, right? I think that it's one of the ideal solutions for kind of what I'm proposing and what I think you were looking for there as well. Tara. So Whoop, wrong button. Anyways, appreciate you guys hanging out with me on Wednesday night. I know there's a lot of things competing for your time, energy, and attention. So the fact that you would spend it with me on the Maple Pill means a lot. Sharing is caring when it comes to these videos, because, you know, big tech's going to do us no favors in regards to their algorithm, or at least until Elon Musk threatens to buy Alphabet, or at least YouTube. But again, those of you that are smashing the like button, sharing on social, already subscribed, I really do appreciate it. And yeah, that's it. We'll be back tomorrow, Thursday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, same place. And I'm sure we'll have a lot more red pills and black pills for you guys in the future. I see one last chat in here from Good News Bear. According to studies, Bitcoin is porous, and they're adding to their own wallets at will. If this is true, Bitcoin is nothing more than the elite's fraudulent extortion of Bitcoin buyers. You know, if you've got a direct link, Good News Bear, I'm definitely happy to explore it. You can't just create more Bitcoin. Now, one of the main arguments against Bitcoin right now, maybe being inflated, is people will say things like Tether are artificially inflating Bitcoin, right? And so Tether is supposed to be a stable coin that's essentially backed by USD. We're like 1-to-1. And, you know, there's a lot of Tether being issued, and then that is used essentially to like on and off ramp people from Bitcoin. A little bit above my pay grade in that regards. It certainly could be possible that people could be inflating Bitcoin through kind of a scheme like that, but that doesn't actually that doesn't change Bitcoin from the 21 million Bitcoins, right? That's something that, you know, you can set up your own node, you can download all the transactions, you can review all the transactions. I do see a lot of like armchair pundits that honestly I don't think know shit about Bitcoin that will come out with a lot of what we call FUD, right? Fear, uncertainty, and doubt about Bitcoin. And I think that there can be real fair criticisms against Bitcoin. I think that the pros outweigh the cons dramatically when looking at Bitcoin versus almost any other alternative. Now, again, if you want to like return to a gold standard or a silver standard or some sort of basket of commodities, again, there's certain reasons why that might be desirable depending upon like your specific local situation. But for me, like the security and transportability of Bitcoin really makes it unique and novel compared to just about any other forms of currency available, right? And no significant pre-mine. So essentially the cards weren't stacked in someone else's favor, unlike Ethereum, right? Where I believe 70% of it was pre-mined by insiders. So that's definitely one of the ways like the rich get richer, or the elites from Web 2 and Web 1 are able to thrive in in cryptocurrency or Web 3. But yeah, anyways, appreciate you guys. I'm going to wrap up. We'll be back tomorrow, and appreciate you guys hanging out with me.
Asking blue pill, red pill, corporate press, I've had my fill. I'm just a simple chap, believing in my own will. Rap, fire, math, evil scheming, this is no drill. Haters masking boosted, but still